Welcome everyone to a new episode of the Zero to Play podcast. I'm your host, Carl Leduc, and today I'm joined by Cordel Robbin-Coker. Cordel is the co-founder and CEO of CARRY1ST, the leading publisher of social games and interactive content in Africa. They've recently closed a Series A funding round led by Convoy Ventures for a total of $6 million, which also included companies like Riot Games and Akatsuki Entertainment, among others. Today, we're going to talk about the African games market and how CARRY1ST believes they have a story that resembles Tencent in its early days. We're going to talk about how the free-to-play model resembles a small digital economy and why that's important, and a glimpse into the lifestyle of an average African consumer of technology and what the rest of the world should take note of. So sit back, relax, and enjoy episode 13 of season 2 of the Zero to Play podcast. All right, welcome Cordel to the show. Thanks for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
So I don't think that there are many people in the world that understand the African games market, but even just like Africa as in terms of where they are technologically and what the kind of breakthroughs are that are happening at the moment. So for everyone listening, I would love it if you could explain what the kind of journey has been in the last decade for Africa as an economy, and what is kind of happening there that you and CARRY1ST are trying to kind of get in front of.
Yeah, absolutely. So I would say over the last decade, and that's a tough period to boil down, but I think there have been a few notable trends. One, there's been extraordinary economic growth. So Africa is probably the second fastest growing region economically behind emerging Asia. You've seen an incredible sort of demographic shift. So the average age of an individual on the continent is 19 years old, and that's compared to something like 43 in Western Europe. So more and more, as those individuals come online and get smartphones in particular, you're seeing kind of an explosion of engagement online. And people, importantly, because of a lack of centralized infrastructure, whether it be financial, physical, telecommunications, energy, people have very quickly shifted to distributed solutions without all of the legacy thinking and expectations. So the mobile phone holds a very, very central place in the lives of one of our users. More so, I know you probably think it holds a central place in your life as well, and my friends in the States as well. But it's even more central. It's a place where people not only go for communications and for fun, but also for financial services, for a number of elements of basic living. So I would say that's the best way to sum it up.
No, it's great. It's an awesome job. And I think we're going to touch a lot in this conversation about how CARRY1ST is kind of using games to get a bunch of the infrastructure created around, payment systems and other infrastructure that isn't really very popular there. And I find that very fascinating. And I want to talk to you guys about why you chose kind of games to get into that area. But just quickly, are there any regions within Africa that you think are growing faster than others? Are there any notable countries there that you think are worth mentioning?
Yeah, look, from a scale standpoint, you have a couple really large economies that are growing really quickly in a number of different ways. So if you look at Nigeria and Egypt, I would say those are the places where you're seeing incredible growth, particularly on the digital side, with regard to engagement. I would say broadly, economically, there are a number of countries that are doing really well. Kenya comes to mind, Rwanda, Ethiopia. Those are all some really good kind of success stories about economies growing and leaders doing some of the right things to help move their countries forward. Africa's 54 countries. We tend to focus on kind of 10 to 15 of those, and there are a lot of kind of interesting growth stories there.
Yeah, that is really interesting. I listened to a talk that you did that spoke about the importance of like data, and when it comes to games that people would download on their mobile phones, they're a lot more conscious of the size of the games, which is something that is, very, mostly no one, I think, could name the size of a game that they have on their phone. Yet in Africa, probably everyone knows the size of every game that's on their device. You made an interesting explanation where you said Fortnite was something like over a gig, Candy Crush is something like 80 megabytes, and CARRY1ST has developed a game called Trivia. What was the name of the game? Sorry, I've forgotten it.
CARRY1ST Trivia.
CARRY1ST Trivia.
Yeah, CARRY1ST Trivia.
It's 7 megabytes or 8 megabytes, and it was designed with the data in mind. Can you talk a bit more about that and what that kind of trend has caused with the development of games for the African community?
Yeah, absolutely. So, for our, on average, I would say 90 to 95% of people are buying airtime and data on a prepaid basis. So something that, all my life has been an automatic kind of recurring, never think about it, never even know it's there, kind of like the equivalent of flipping on a light switch or turning on the tap, is a very, very conscious purchase for people. People are multiple times a week going into their pocket and buying it. And on average, a gig of data costs somewhere between 5 to 7 times for an individual on the continent versus the US, for example. So this is a very, very real and substantial outlay for people. And so there is a lot more conscientiousness around data use. The second thing which we learned probably since I gave that talk is that the size of an application matters even more because of storage constraints. So, in a lot of frontier markets, Android is king. And the way that you get a lower cost Android phone is usually to reduce the storage capacity as well as the processing. And so people have to make like very, very legitimate trade-offs as to what apps are on their phone. And so, if I'm downloading a new game, I might have to consider, am I going to get rid of my mobile banking app? Am I deleting WhatsApp? And so there's even a higher burden on the space that you use and the data that you consume. And so when we were still creating our own games, and we've now shifted away from that, that was one of the things that we really built for, was to see if we could have things that were very data light, that were small and compact, and it makes a really big difference.
Yeah, I think that was an interesting thing to read about with CARRY1ST, how you guys transitioned from being a developer to becoming a publisher, and how that's kind of grown the relationship that you have with other studios in Africa and just international studios wanting to get access to African markets and kind of develop better games for there. What was there a moment that you can think of that kind of had that realization that was a better direction for CARRY1ST rather than staying as a developer and developing more games?
I would say the realization kind of came over time, but there were really two things. I would say two or three factors that led to it. So we were developing and publishing our own games. We had a #1 game in 2019, which was #1 for most of the year in Nigeria. Also hit #1 in Kenya, which are two of our three biggest markets. That was CARRY1ST Trivia.
Wow.
And we were really excited, but there were a few realizations. I think one, as we engaged even more deeply with our users, we learned that they didn't need their own content, right? Like Africa doesn't need its own content. Individuals and gamers on the continent want to play the best games in the world, right?
Mm-hmm.
They want to play the same games that you and I play and talk about. So that was one. Two, I think we learned and realized that making great games is incredibly difficult, and incredibly difficult to do on a repeatable basis. And funny enough, that we didn't have any particular competitive advantage in making games. So that was notable. And then the final thing is, we learned that some of the challenges which we were scaling for an individual game, so things like data, things like localization, things like access to alternative payments in order to buy digital currency, that those were problems that everyone was facing, and particularly people around the world that had very little context. And so I would say those three things led us to believe that there was a sort of higher and better use for our skills and for our sort of regional knowledge as a conduit, as a partner to content providers and content owners, where we could be sort of the business arm on the ground, solving these problems systematically. They could make great content, or they could leverage existing content and be able to find additional markets and incrementality. So
I think I read somewhere that that CARRY1ST offers a way for users to pay for games without using money. And I'd love it if you could explain a little bit more the different kinds of ways that people can can pay for things, because I think there's some really innovative ways that the West don't think about that are very popular in Africa.
Yeah, so as I mentioned, because of a lack of centralized infrastructure, there's been a bit of a leapfrogging. And so there are a number of payment methods that are quite common across our region that haven't yet or taken off in the West, and maybe never will. So mobile money is one really big example. So Africa has over 50% of the mobile money flows by transactions and by value. And it's one of those scenarios where users can go to agents, give them cash, that cash gets loaded up into a virtual wallet, and then just with their phone number, they can make peer-to-peer purchases, they can make purchases online, and they can also make purchases at point of sale. The best example of this, the most famous, is called M-Pesa. It started by a telco in Kenya, and there are some statistics that say that I think half of the GDP of Kenya flows through M-Pesa on an annual basis. So things like that, instant bank transfer, the ability to go to a gas station or a small shop and pay at the till and get a PIN on your receipt, which you can then use to load up a digital wallet. There are sort of a wide range of sort of alternative payment methods which allow people to be able to pay for things without necessarily plugging into like a centralized banking or switching infrastructure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's really interesting. And one thing I'd love to touch on, but I know this can devolve into a long conversation. But cryptocurrency is something that gets spoken about a little bit in the games industry, and about if there is a future there for economies. And I know Nigeria, I think, has been in the news sometimes for adopting Bitcoin early on, and that helping in terms of in times of economic crisis. Is that something that you're seeing? Africa as a whole kind of develop faster than the rest of the world? Is that an area that you think even games might dip into earlier than games in the West and other areas in the world?
So we're seeing extraordinary adoption of crypto in the region, and you mentioned Nigeria. It's an extraordinary story. I think by value, it's the #2 crypto market in the world behind the United States.
Wow.
There was a survey recently which asked people, whether or not they use or own cryptocurrency. And Nigeria had the highest rate of response there at 32%. Just for context, the #2 country was Vietnam, and that was 21%.
Wow.
So you're looking at like 50% greater than the next highest rate of adoption in the world. And again, it's born of constraints, right? So, moving money and particularly exchanging currency, getting in and out of dollars, euros, pounds, can be quite challenging in a country like Nigeria. And I lived there for 5 years, so I lived through it. And so, when you get an alternative mechanism like crypto, which allows people to do so in a seamless way, around central governments and central infrastructure, people are very, very, very sort of open to adopting new things. And there's a level of ingenuity and a level of sort of hustle that exists on the continent where people will really kind of run with things. So as far as general life, I think crypto has like a very, very valid and legitimate use case. I think far beyond the West, where I think it's sort of inflation hedge, store of value, a way to say like F you to the government, and a certain level of speculation from an asset price standpoint. I think crypto has like a central role to play in people's daily lives. Now, when we think about games, I do think that definitely extends into the ability to pay for content, particularly in-game content, as a generalized payment method. So I think that's happening, and that will accelerate, and that's something that we're going to facilitate, hopefully fairly soon. As far as like tokenizing, assets, NFTs, and so on, my sense is that the West is going to lead that path. Mm-hmm. And I think there will be I think there will be equal adoption in frontier markets, but it feels like a luxurious set of problems to be solving, in my view.
Yeah, no, that's a really, it's crazy that you lived in Nigeria for 5 years and lived through it. So CARRY1ST has an arm called PayFirst. Can you explain a little bit what that is and where that kind of sits in the whole web of CARRY1ST products?
Yeah, so our business, the way we think about it, on sort of one side of it, we have publishing, and I would consider that to be a service. It's everything from distribution, user acquisition, customer service, and monetization. And then on the other half, we have what we call the platform. And at the core of the platform is PayFirst. And the platform basically is developing proprietary technology that allows us to scale and monetize content in the region better than anyone else is the plan. And so Pay First is an aggregated payment service which plugs into and partners with a number of the top fintech companies in the region, which provide these alternative methods that we spoke about, and creates basically like a single virtualized data layer and a single set of APIs, which allow us to plug it in to kind of virtually anything that can be fulfilled digitally. So Pay First is at the core. At the core of it, it's just about access. It's allowing users to leverage payment methods that they use in their daily lives for content, and that connection hadn't been made up until now. On top of that is like a digital top-up shop, so like an e-commerce interface, which allows for discovery and payment. So yeah, so that's Pay First.
Yeah, it's cool. No, thanks for explaining that, and it's fascinating because I don't know, those things need to be, and you probably realize through the journey of CARRY1ST is like those are problems that need to be solved, and that there's a huge opportunity there to help, you know, bridge the gap between giving the locals access to content online, which is something you don't think about, or I don't have to think about that on a daily basis, where it's probably really helpful for others. So I want to plug a game that you guys have published called Gebeta, which is developed by Kene Games. And it's like a Mancala version, a digital Mancala game that is infused with kind of free-to-play mechanics. It feels like Candy Crush, and I love that because it's, you know, Mancala is one of the oldest games ever created, and I think it originated in Africa as well. And it was such a cool experience to play, and it felt like it fit within the ecosystem of free-to-play games on the App Store right now. I'd highly recommend other people downloading it, playing it, supporting it. What can you talk about the relationship you had with Kene Games when delivering that, and what kind of value did you provide for them to get it out onto the App Store?
So Kene and Gebeta are the first studio and the first game that we signed when we made this transition in 2020. We were introduced through one of our investors that knew them, and it sort of instantaneously was a fit, right? They are, Kene is a small studio with a handful of people in Ethiopia, incredibly talented, incredibly inspired. But as any indie studio, they have limitations, right? They had a game that had an excellent core mechanic. I don't know if you sort of noticed the feel of actually playing the Mancala, the sounds. It's incredibly satisfying. But they had yet to kind of layer on the sort of full set of free to play mechanics and meta, which take a game from being, you know, ostensibly a toy, right? Something that's fun to do, fun to play with, all the way to being something that you can build a business on. Mm-hmm. And so it was really cool. It was the first time we got to really test out and flex our muscles as a publisher. And so I think the first thing we did was really try and align with them on a vision and a roadmap for the game, where we wanted to go. We worked very closely with them on the design of the meta. There's a little bit of a saga system. We helped them, you know, modify and enhance the approach and the map. And ultimately now we're that the game is good, retention is solid, and we're helping them kind of put the finishing touches on some of the social features, which will help with, hopefully later stage retention, as well as the economy design. So that's one of the cases with an indie studio, given some of the skills that we've been able to bring on, some strong game designers and product managers and live ops operators, where we can be quite hands-on in helping to almost like supplement their team in a way as they go. And they have the inspiration, they have the vision, they really know what they want to build, but we can sort of help to get them there, hopefully a little bit faster and better when you get there.
That's awesome. And that's just one partnership where I'm sure there's going to be many, many more. You mentioned earlier that you weren't too interested in, you said the locals weren't interested in playing local content, that they wanted access to the best games in the world. And my question is, do you think that there's an opportunity for indie developers, whether it's in New Zealand where I am, or it could be in Europe or America, to develop games aimed for an African market, like whether it's a very low, a 10 megabyte game that, is there a market for people to be thinking of that as an opportunity to develop games for specifically?
I think there's definitely an opportunity there, and so when I say Africa doesn't need its own content, I think I mainly mean thematically, right?
Mm-hmm.
There is a view that that you need African characters and African folklore and African themes. And the truth is, what we have found is that like game themes, art styles, and so on, that people enjoy tend to look and feel quite similar to broader, let's say, Western themes. Mm-hmm. But there's definitely an opportunity from an accessibility standpoint, build for Africa. And there are very similar issues across a number of frontier markets, Southeast Asia, and Latin America as well. And the way to do that is really to be quite intentional about your assets, about your creatives, building apps that are compact, ones that work in lower or like variable connectivity, right? Mm-hmm. If you look at Supercell's games, one of the things that I noticed that maybe not a lot of people notice is that they fire up anywhere, anytime in like half a second, right? Mm-hmm. Like, and if you lose connectivity, the ability to come back and go right back into gameplay instantaneously is like almost no one else or no other games in the market, right? And I don't know why they've sort of honed in on that or been able to be really excellent, but if people focused on some of those things, you would have games which work even better on lower spec devices, which work with sort of lower speed connectivity, and therefore you would have a much larger addressable market than you do now, just by virtue of making them more accessible.
Yeah, I think accessibility is really important. That I think studios in Africa would have a great perspective on. But I think even just diversity and just having stories that are coming from a diverse culture. I know you mentioned it's not, you don't want to play too deeply into that, but I'm sure there are lessons that African developers will learn that will be really valuable to the rest of the world to experience and to gain a more worldview approach of just of the world in general. I know we have conversations like that here in New Zealand with the multi-game development, and the government really wants to put funding into projects that are very cultural. And there's a big discussion about, because games are such an export market driven um, source of entertainment, you can't really balance the two. They're very different in terms of, trying to build a free-to-play game that's popular overseas is very different to trying to build a game that is culturally uh, resounding in moldy stories, and that's like an ongoing conversation that happens a lot, which I'm sure you'd get a lot of that kind of pressure from Africa. So it's cool that you guys are taking that into account, and I think Gabetta does a perfect job of being a balance between the two. It doesn't feel like you're pushing it down the users' throats. It's there. It's an experience. You're using the game mechanics that are popular and that everyone can relate to, and it's fun. And I think that's what's important, is that it's fun at the end of the day.
Yeah, 100%. So at one point, and I don't use it anymore, but when we raised our seed, there's this like cheesy phrase in our press release, which was bringing the world of gaming to Africa and bringing Africa to the world. What I think game is really interesting about games is that they're an exchange, right? And so they're an exchange of ideas, of themes, of cultures, of character types. And so I do think that perhaps a developer in New Zealand or a developer in Ethiopia should be pouring in elements of their culture and of their sort of history and all those things into their games. I just don't think that those games are then reserved for New Zealanders or Ethiopians, right? If there is a universal nature to games, and if they're fun, and if they're engaging, and if they have progression, they can be played by everyone in the world, right? And so now you're taking these, in your case, themes and experiences and culture from New Zealand, and you're disseminating them on a global basis. So I think that's really cool, and I agree. I think Gabetta is an awesome example of that. That's one of the cases where we actually are publishing the game on a global basis, and so it's cool to take this kind of local ancient game and an Ethiopian kind of flavor of it, and put it in the hands of people, around the world. That's fun.
Totally. Yeah. I appreciate you touching on that. You did a much better job of explaining it than I have. It can be a really, if I'm just being honest, it can be a touchy subject to navigate around, but it is an area that I want to just kind of dive into head first, because I want to become better at understanding and being more respectful, and it's going to take me some time before I can navigate around those conversations in the right way. But I do really appreciate how you summed it up there, and that was really cool. Going on to what was I gonna mention? There was something that I read about CARRY1ST wanting to expand bigger than games, bigger than payment systems, and I just want to kind of understand where the vision for CARRY1ST is for the long term. I think I read somewhere like consumer internet was an area that you guys wanted to go into. Is there anything that you can talk about with that, or any kind of big lofty goals that you think are that are kind of behind the CARRY1ST brand?
Yeah. There's always, particularly as a startup, there's always a balance between focusing on what's in front of you so that you can execute with excellence, and you can go from, not being a company to between that, a broader vision about where this could go, and about, what it's all about. So depending on the audience, I either say we're a game company, we publish games, that's what we're doing. We have a few coming out, and that's what we're focused on. and there are other scenarios where I sort of look forward, a decade or 5 to 7 years, and I would say in the latter frame, we're looking to be the leading consumer internet company in Africa. There are a handful of sort of consumer internet giants around the world. They come to be that through different means, right? We've seen search, social, chat, now in Southeast Asia with games. And our view is that in Africa, games and payments are the best entree and starting point to developing the sort of go-to name brand. Users use it every single day, consumer internet company and brand. And so, games are incredibly universal, right? Everyone loves them, whether they know it or not. And what we've seen is that on mobile, and in Africa, mobile is synonymous with the internet because over 95% of internet access is through a mobile phone. That it's the place where people start. When they get their first smartphone, they want to chat with their friends and play games. So we want to be there, right? And we want to build the dominant, undisputed gaming champion in the region. We want to be the go-to partner for international players that are looking to access this new and exciting consumer base. But through that, we're developing a set of technologies and capabilities that extend and that we think extend to all forms of digital media and digital content. And so we want to basically be that go-to player, whether it's whether it's airtime and data, whether it's your Tinder or Netflix subscription, or whether it's a game. We want to be kind of the go-to portal as a company, not necessarily as a super app, for users to be able to engage in the digital world.
That's cool. No, and what an exciting time for you then, because I'm sure over the next decade there'll be really innovative products that come up, from developers within countries like Ethiopia, and that you guys will be right there to help them launch and help them get become a more global company. And that's very exciting to see. I'm on board with that vision. And I'm really excited to see the kind of acquisitions that you guys make, the kind of games that you release, and the kind of systems behind those games that might lean towards certain different areas, whether it's like a more chat-based game and then kind of entering that area a bit more. I'm fascinated. It's really exciting. But talking less about the future now, I'd love to talk a bit more about you and what your past is, and why. Because I believe you studied finance and you worked in finance, and I want to know the moment that you saw the opportunity to go into game development and what that switch was like, and not so much how you got to where you are now, but more that transition from finance into game development, and what that was like and why you chose to do that.
Yeah, so I would say in my career, there have been two big transitions. The first, working and spending all my time in the West. So I worked in investment banking in New York and London and private equity in DC, to shifting over to the continent. And then the second was going from a finance guy to a gaming guy. Both of which are, I would say, incredibly stark, but I think make sense or have made sense. So look, I'm originally from Sierra Leone. I left when I was very young during a war, and from the moment that I became sort of conscious of it, have believed that my purpose in life was to make it back to the region, to be helpful however I can in business and policy and so on and so forth. So I would say that the transition from working in New York City or DC to living in Lagos, Nigeria, was really part of that journey. And then the second part, which is transitioning from being an investor to being an operator in the game space, I would say came about through serendipity in many ways. I grew up playing games primarily on console. I was an avid, gamer. I played a lot of sports games and a lot of shooter games. But I from when I graduated university and got a job, I basically stopped, right? I was one of those unimaginative people who thought that, if you were working 90 hours a week, that you couldn't continue like playing Madden, 100 games of Madden a week with your friends, which turns out is a little bit of a false dichotomy. But so I missed the entire wave, initial mobile wave. And truly, when I started CARRY1ST, had no idea how incredible an industry this is. I definitely knew how incredible a pastime it was, and how amazing it was for connecting people. One of my best friends of all time, we basically became great friends over playing games in our freshman dorm. And so really it was, I was working private equity. I was also investing on the side in like venture style companies across Africa. And I just saw like a huge opportunity. I saw mobile penetration exploding. I saw, these alternative payment systems start to come together. I saw young people starting to engage more and more and more on the phone. And I kind of looked around and figured, well, what's next, right? Like, WhatsApp already exists. There's chat. But what else do people want to do on their phones? And to me, it was obvious that playing games was the next thing. And importantly, that people would pay for content. Because I had seen examples in sports betting and other things like that. And so, a buddy of mine who was living in New York had been playing HQ Trivia and thought that there was a really interesting opportunity to create an HQ Trivia for Africa, right? Mm-hmm. Trivia is hyper localized, it's hyper contextual. It's about, your political figures, your sports, your history. And I thought that it had a lot of legs, and thought that sort of gaming as like a broader ecosystem was going to take off. So I basically quit my job, which sounds crazy now, but I quit like a reasonably promising finance career to start an African version of HQ Trivia. And through that process, learned more about free to play, and became basically, obsessed with sort of the new version of games and gaming as a service, and that's really how things took off. So it, I say to people, there was some foresight there, but there was also some dumb luck.
No, I think that's the perfect story to see how this arc is going, and I guess you are betting now that the African market continues to adopt mobile and to play more games and to want to kind of engage more with the software and the content of the rest of the world. So that's really exciting to see that you're right in the middle of that. I really appreciate you giving your story, because I think that's really inspiring for people to hear, just how you got to that point and how random it can seem. You probably didn't know when you left America that you'd be working so deep in games, and especially with your Series A fund having so many games studios and publishers and companies backing you. That's really exciting, and it's even more proof that they believe in what you're doing at CARRY1ST, and it's really exciting, yeah, to just see that whole market develop, and what trends we're going to see that are in that market. So yeah, I really appreciate you sharing your story and some of the facts behind the African market, which I think a lot of people would get a lot of value in hearing, and just understanding what that chunk of the world is doing, because it is a huge market, and I think we're going to only hear more and more about it going forward. So if anyone is interested in following more of your journey, I know they can follow you on LinkedIn at Cordel RC, or on Twitter at Cordel RC as well. Is there anywhere else that you'd like to point people that might be listening and interested in following your journey and CARRY1ST's journey over the next few years and decades?
I think LinkedIn is the primary place. I have ADD, so I try and focus on one platform at a time. And we also have our games and our company on Instagram, which is probably a little bit more exciting. So yeah, if you could follow us there, we're really excited about the journey ahead, and eager to see what happens, where it goes from here.
Totally. Are there any? You mentioned a few games that you're going to be publishing soon. Is there anything that you can reveal or tease that we can get excited about seeing soon?
Yeah, so we are in the very, very late stages of soft launch with a game called Mine Rescue. And Mine Rescue is created by the Rocket Spiel team based in Sweden. We're really excited about that one. That's going to be a global launch. And then we have a couple more coming after that, and we also have what we think will be a pretty big announcement about a partnership with a major global studio and publisher. So
cool.
Yeah, stay tuned.
That's very exciting. Wow. Yeah, it's been a pleasure to have you on and to have some of your time. Thank you so much. And yeah, I wish you the best, and very exciting times ahead for you guys. But yeah, thanks for coming on.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
See you later.